Maybe let's start by talking about the naming, like from Rapture. I mean, Rapture is a very evocative name.
Mm-hmm.
Screens, maybe not as much. Inprecision is not a word, but you made it a word.
Yes.
So, like, just talk to me when you think about naming projects.
It's I don't have a strategy to it. Rapture was kind of a climax to some work I've been doing for several years, starting with a Genesis series that I did before NFTs and all that. So Rapture seemed like fitting in terms of wording. They are also like they are erupting, and Rapture is feeling very much like the same kind of word. Screens, I was trying to be a bit clever in the naming in terms of like they are displayed on screens. They are based on some of the looks of screen printing, and they are showing like folded screens. Like there was a lot of screens in the ideas behind it. So it just seemed fitting. It's not a evocative word, but it's a very recognizable word and very memeable word.
Descriptive, yeah.
Yeah.
I know him.
Inprecision is it's kind of a wordplay on embracing imprecision in doing generative art. I really enjoy infusing faults into the artwork. I think perfection is pretty boring at its if you put it in hyperbole, then perfection is never that interesting. Like computers are capable of infinite perfection, and that's nothing new. Like they can draw the most perfect circle, but who cares? Like a circle is more interesting if there's something unsettling about it. And this series about imperfections, but it's also about like the tension between precision and imperfections, and like imprecision was kind of like something is happening. They are infusing precision into something imprecise.
Yep.
And kind of liking that wordplay.
I mean, that's when we first met, and I was like, hey, we're going to do something in London. Would love to have you involved. I remember you started talking about like Kandinsky and watercolors.
Mm-hmm. Stay true to that.
Yeah. And watercolor, I mean, like it's, it stains the page.
Yeah.
Right? And you have control, but you really don't have control.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of like my embrace of imprecisions is also a way for me to simplify the composition in some way, because the nice thing about like physical paint and physical production methods is that they have some sort of like fractal fault in them. Like you can look closer and closer and you can see more and more detail. And you don't have that in digital unless you infuse it. And that means that very, very simple computer generated art can become quite a bit flat because it doesn't have any texture to it. And embracing this watercolorish aesthetic allowed me to kind of deal back on the complexity of the system and kind of be at peace with looking at some more like simplistic setups. Embracing what I'm really working with here is like how can you infuse different compositions within a very simple setup, and how can you like evaluate whether that composition works. So I really wanted something where I can keep everything super simple without having it feel flat. So yeah, it'll kind of
okay. So we jumped right in. Like step back a little bit. Just talk about like your own genesis, where you come from, how you came to your work and your practice, and kind of where we are today.
So by training, I'm a food scientist that has had kind of a weird career path.
What is a food scientist?
Food science, like that can be a lot. That's very broad, but for me, I was focusing on microbacteria and dairy fermentation and so on, making analysis of that genomes and figuring out why it did what it did. Some others could be potentially manufacturing and designing production equipment. So like it's a very broad term, but that's where I started, and I moved more and more into like analyzing genomes and so on. Moved into bioinformatics, which is like.
And you grew up in Copenhagen?
I didn't grow up in Copenhagen. I grew up in a city in Denmark that no one knows. moved to Copenhagen for study. So my path kind of became more and more about data analysis, which is programming in these days. And I embraced the tool building more and more. So I ended up actually being a software engineer, creating data science tools, and focusing on the data visualization, the graphics part of it. And while all of this was going on, I was like having a creative itch around photography, which I've always really enjoyed, going out, taking pictures, and also the post-processing of photos.
When did that start?
My father did photography, but kind of like me, kind of lost the time and interest when he got kids. So I've mainly been doing it digitally. I know how to develop as well, but it has been the digital workflow that really ticked me. But then, as I said, I got kids. I didn't have time to chase the light. So
lots of photographs of kids.
Yeah,
I've done that.
Exactly. So that kind of ended up being put on the side, and I was searching for kind of a creative outlet.
What kind of photography, though? So digital, but like, what was the subject?
It was a lot of architecture, a lot of landscape. So like these more scenic setups. Yeah, I was a creative soul without an outlet for a while, and then at some point I was exposed to generative art by Inconvergent, Anders Huff's artistic name, and it hadn't occurred to me at all.
When was that?
I was in late 2016, I think, something like that. And it hadn't occurred to me that you could like do data visualization-ish output without any data, like that you would just like create some data and use it for artistic purpose. Like I hadn't really thought about that, and it just instantly clicked for me. Yeah. So since that, like I wrote my first like generative art code in 17, and just plowed ahead from there. Certainly spending more and more time on it.
You have a day job.
Yeah, I do.
You want to describe it?
Well, it's open source development, creating data visualization tools, creating basically taking care of the whole graphics stack from actually encoding PNG images to how to encode data into circles and whatnot. So
how to encode data in circles?
Well, yeah. So before I began working, not working for art products, but working for these more on-chain stuff, all of my work was actually based on the tools that I developed for my day job. So it was a fantastic way to actually become a user again of my own tools, because I went into this tool building because I needed it. I liked solving my own issues, but at some point you don't have time to both be the user and be the developer. You have to kind of choose side, and I ended up being developer. And I had searched for a way to come back and actually be a user of my own tools. And generative art was an obvious answer to that as well.
You want to talk a little bit about just artistic influences? I mean, Kandinsky comes up in this project.
Mm-hmm. I'm very inspired by some of the generative art that was created pre-NFT. Not way back, but like this kind of bubbling in the community that we had leading up to the NFT craze happening in 2020, 21. I'm very much aligned with Tyler Hobbs, also Matt, in terms of pursuing this slightly analog feel. I'm not that much into this hyper digital aesthetic. So I'm kind of thinking about code as a brush that I want to apply, and like I have my visions and my brush is the code, but apart from that, there's nothing digital really about it. So I'm very much inspired by those that take up this analog, this non-digital aesthetic. It also means that I'm quite inspired by traditional artists, because they are doing the same, just without code, but actual brushes.
There's also like, I hadn't thought of this before, but like there's so many contemporary artists or modern artists, Solo Wit, who are trying to take painting and almost make it look perfectly digital.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's your work, and I think Tyler's work with Incomplete Control, among others, that are trying to like superb programmers that are trying to create systems that look analog or sort of handmade.
Yeah. It's super impressive to, like, there's an art to having analog made to feel digital.
Yep.
Like, if you can achieve perfection...
Like Donald Judd, like perfect boxes.
Well, basically, like, if you can achieve perfection through imperfect means, that's artistic in itself. With generative art, with algorithms, you already have perfection. Like, you're capable of it, so that in itself is not a feat. And knowing that it's digital and seeing that it's perfect, for me at least, doesn't really tick my itch. So for me, it's more interesting to go the other way. And how can I fuse imperfection into my artwork in a way that's both not taggy and artistic in some sense.
When you see the work at the gallery, particularly with this idea of like watercolor stains, like it's really interesting to see something that looks like a mistake when you know that it's coming out of code.
Yeah.
So like, what is that process like for you? Because you're an accomplished programmer, to like, how do you create a beautiful, perfect system to create things that look spontaneous or accidental?
So
or noisy.
Yeah. Well, as generative artists, we really enjoy noise. Noise is, like we see here, like this kind of organic flow, but it's not structured in any way. And like just through a lot of years of working with it, I kind of like, I know it by heart. I know how to wield it to not make something that is obviously based on noise, but wield the power in those systems to kind of create organic looking things that have like faults that are not obviously placed at some certain points in time or not repeating itself, but feels organic. And
how do you measure it?
With my,
you just know?
Like I'm the first critics to look at my work. So yeah, I've like for this project, but also everything else I've been doing. It's like a constant iteration process. Like I've seen started from something like that and just looking at it again and again and again. What stands out as artificial here? Why does it do that? How can I change that? What doesn't?
But you
right?
Practice by like spilling things on paper?
No, but I practice by looking at nature. I practice by looking at art. I practice by looking at paper and such. But also at a certain point you become familiar with the tools. Like I would say, code is my brush, and I've been using that brush for a while now, so I know how it behaves in a certain sense. Even though that I'm moving between something like in screens that were mimicking more a grainy silk screen texture and something like watercolor inspired aesthetic, I know the brush. I know how to wield it. So there is a certain amount of experience that comes after like 5 or so years.
And is it an accomplishment? So in taking screens and there's 1,000 outputs, like were there outputs that really surprised you? And is
during
that an
the
accomplishment?
minting?
Yeah.
Definitely in screens. It's also a very, very open system, and it's built to surprise. And there's like I still see new versions of screens surprise me. So yeah, certainly. It's also like it was built for unlimited output. Like I was stretching myself with this idea, trying to not put in variation for the sake of variation, but like the core idea of the algorithm was by itself capable of creating a high degree of variation, so it didn't feel like forced. For this one, where I knew that, well, it's going to be 100 pieces, that had also informed me in terms of what I'm going to do with it. I'm much more leaning into a homogenic look of the whole system without something that is deeply surprising. I don't expect myself to be super surprised during the next couple of days. Because
what would surprise you? Or you don't know yet?
Well, if I knew, then I wouldn't be surprised. Like I would be surprised if we had a blank image. That would be a horror. story. But
blank
apart from
image.
that, like bugs can always surprise you, but I hope I've avoided those.
But talk a little bit about that, of sort of the difference between designing an algorithm for 100 outputs versus 1,000.
Yeah. I think like certain ideas are amenable to more outputs. Like I could certainly add more variability to Inprecision by adding additional palettes, like adding additional ways of drawing it and so on. But the core idea is not made for 1,000. So it would be like infused variation for the sake of variation instead of for the sake of having a system that feels coherent. Whereas with screens, when I started thinking about it, I felt that I've come up with a core concept that was actually capable of creating more. So I didn't need to like tag on additional variation just to make it feel different. So it really like you have to have the confidence to know that, is it okay for this to be 1,000? Is it really better suited to be 100? Like having this.
You're saying if we did 500 outputs of Inprecision, it would get boring? It would get repetitive?
Yeah, to some extent. It would not elevate the collection. I think screens could certainly run, maybe not forever, but for a long time, and still create pieces that had a singular identity compared to the rest of the collection. Whereas with something like Inprecision, the identity is much more in the core concept of the algorithm, more than it's in the individual pieces. If that makes sense. And that also means that it doesn't need as many iterations to kind of capture the core identity of the system. It's still something that I think artists, generative artists, are being forced to think about in new ways, because like this whole idea of having like these huge editions, small editions of like this long form generative art style is pretty new. We're still kind of figuring out what it really means to have
what does long form
mean?
So
it's called coined by Tyler Hobbs. Basically, like the idea that you can have a system where the artist steps back and let the system just generate new pieces, no curation from the artist. It's definitely very, very different from what I did earlier on, where I kind of sat down, I was iterating on a single piece until I was happy with it, and like, this is the final piece, and showed it to the world, either through Twitter or whatever. Here you have to think much more about how you're shepherding the variation in the system. What does it mean for a system to be coherent? What does it mean for a system to have enough variation, and so on? And it's just very, very different from what most of us at least, are used to thinking about. So I think we'll see a lot of maturation in this space as we go on, as we begin to know what it really will mean to have, like, what is variation in the context of an algorithm? What is
do you know when it's ready? When it's ready to let go?
It's always. I feel I'm getting better at it. Yeah. I certainly know when it's not ready.
Okay.
And we can start from there, and then when that feeling kind of recedes, then it's probably because it's getting ready. I think when we're working with these systems that are meant to output a certain amount of iterations, and you have to feel good about every one of them, it helps a lot simply just running a batch of that number, or maybe twice that number, and then seeing, well, are there 10 there that you don't want to sign? Then you're probably not ready.
Run it again.
Not run it again, but tweak, sit down, figure out why are those not working for you? Like, what can I do without changing like the soul of the system? How can I kind of weed out those types of output? I think when you're at the point where you don't feel uncomfortable creating the first mint, then it's good to go. If you're like, oh, I hope it's not going to be bad, you probably shouldn't release it like that, because then you're putting that feeling on your collectors that they shouldn't be worried whether it's going to be bad or good. That they should be pretty confident.
There's a Web 2, I think it was Reid Hoffman, and I quoted it a lot, where it's like, if you're not embarrassed by your first release, you've waited too long. It's not what I'm hearing from you.
Well, it's not my first release.
Okay.
So you shouldn't be afraid to jump into something. But when we are at a point where, like, I've released several projects, and like, no denying it, there's a lot of money flowing through this space right now. Like, you're also asking people to spend money on your art, and you really have to be able to look them in a straight face and say, well, this is actually my best work, and I'm not worried that something comes out that looks horrible. I think that's like, you have to be serious about being an artist if you want to do this. Not that you can't make art as a hobby basis, but if you want to sell your art, you have to be serious about it as well. Yeah, exactly.
So you talked about sort of edition size. What about output form? So this is a project that from the get-go we talked about in terms of printing.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't meant to be, I mean, it can obviously, any NFT can be seen on the screen. Mm-hmm. But with this in particular, you thought about it as primarily for printing. Yeah. You want to talk about how does that factor into your creative process, knowing that the IRL experience is going to be one where somebody receives the print first?
First of all, I see print as the final output of almost everything I do. I'm almost uniquely making static work. So print makes sense for me. And for me,
even with screens, so much of my experience before I met you was just seeing them build. So is that an
was still, the build-up phase is something that is purely digital, of course. But I still see, like, I'm creating the first batch of screen prints now, and I can't wait to see them. Like, for me, holding something physical in my hand, like that's the true form of my artwork. That being said, Inprecision is the first time where I was developing it with, like, a clear intention about these pieces existing, all of them in some format of print. And it was kind of interesting because I was, like, down to the grain of the paper. I was kind of designing the algorithm to look good on a certain type of textured paper. I was also envisioning the pieces at a certain size. I don't think Inprecision is work that is as good looking on a mobile phone as it is on a huge print. But that's okay. Like the intention of this series is to exist in a huge setting on paper and really be in a dialogue between the texture of the paper and the colors of the print. So that has definitely, like, I have leaned into that to a higher degree than I used to do, both in terms of how would you set up a composition when you know that it's going to be large, because you can. It's both daunting in the sense that if you have a very large print and you have some large areas where nothing happens, it can become very, very flat. Mm-hmm. But it also allows you to add some level of detail that would otherwise be ignored or lost.
And are you at home printing pieces and checking the texture?
So I don't have the capabilities of printing A1 at home, but I do most of my prints myself, and testing out on paper, looking at seeing how the texture of the algorithm interacted with the paper and so on is definitely a part of this development. It's been quite fun to actually have that deep connection with the output format.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the design of the exhibit?
The idea is that, well, these were designed for print. And what I wanted to do was also, like, center the whole exhibition around the craft of printing stuff, both in terms of how you end up looking at the piece, but also as a way to slow down the pace. Because with NFTs, and I'm a collector myself, we're
going to talk about that. Yeah.
Like the amount of art that I've collected over the last year is, like, crazy. I collected before NFTs, ordering prints from people, and now it's just, like, spiraled out of control in some sense. So the art consumption in Web3 is just, like, the pace and consumption rate is just huge. And with this, I kind of wanted
appreciation, enjoyment, not just consumption, but yeah.
Also that. No, it's not necessarily like a negative, but you just, kind of in the same way as after streaming services with music, like you didn't have the same connection with the albums that you bought anymore. Like
it wasn't as intentional as playing a record and cleaning it and putting it on the turntable when you could just go on.
Exactly. And there's good things and bad things about that. But I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of not only allow people to take a step back, but actually force people to take a step back as they learn about the artwork. Because as they are minting these new artworks, they will be going into a room with a huge printer, and the first view they get of their piece will be coming out of the printer. And a print is not instantaneous. It's a creation process.
How long does it take?
I think it's around 15, 20 minutes.
Is it multiple passes, or does it come out a little bit at a time?
Just a little bit at a time.
So you'll see one strip, and you won't really see how it is until it comes all the way out.
Exactly. And for me, that...
you can't rip it out of the printer.
You can't rip it out of the printer, and you have to kind of just dwell on the small detail that you have, and you cannot dwell on those small details without thinking I wonder what the rest of the image will look like. And as you do that, you will continuously be surprised that reality doesn't fit your imagination, because it doesn't care what you imagine it to look like. It's already predetermined. So you will latch on to details that would probably not be seen if you just saw the whole picture at once, because they would make sense for your own imagination of how it would look, and you will latch onto those and build a special relationship to this incomplete picture that will gradually be revealed. At least that's the intention of it. So you will hopefully have this experience of getting a bit more tight connection with what comes out.
Just shifting to maybe your role as a collector, and which artists that you're most engaged with. I know you have a big collection of memories of Shilin from Emily. Do you want to talk about maybe her work and how do you approach the market as a collector? How is that different than as an artist? And how all your ETH that you're making from all your projects just gets funneled back into collecting art blocks artists?
Yeah. Well, it's it's a very privileged position in some sense. I don't have to sell anything. I don't have to think about market movements because I have no intention of selling. I'm collecting for my own enjoyment, and I don't have to sustain myself by making good investments in anything. So I think that gives you a different approach to collecting, because you are basically just looking at stuff and don't caring where it goes. I know, it's not like I'm unique in that sense. There are other people that are just buying for appreciation, of course, but I don't need anything to go well. And if I see something that
lucky you,
yes,
yeah,
very lucky me. That's extreme privilege. I'm absolutely sure of that, or certain of that. But it also means I can see work, and I can, if there's something that resonates deeply with me, or if there are artists that I really want to support, I can go all in and don't really care about if other agrees with me. With for Memories of Killing, which thankfully came out right after Screen, so I had a lot of investment capabilities. What I saw there was a very very unique, very delicate approach to generative art that I hadn't seen before. I think Emily is quite fantastic in that regard, that she has this perfect, how do you say, the marriage of her heritage and the delicacy of her coding really elevated Memory of Killing for me to be something that was something that I, no matter what everyone else was thinking, was something I really want to support her.
13 you got on the first day?
15.
15,
yeah.
Okay.
All good.
We're not counting.
Yeah.
Primary, secondary, both?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. And I enjoy minting, I enjoy supporting the artists, but I also, we're still in a budding ecosystem, and I think it's also, I have received my due from collectors, and buying on secondary is also a way to kind of feed back into that.
So a project drops, and you can scan for rarity if you want. Some people do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fair.
Everybody has their own algorithm. How do you quickly look at a bunch of outputs and figure out what resonates with you?
Like it's very seldom that I go all in on day one and like try to slurp up things. Killing is kind of special in that regard. Usually I don't have that many pieces of a single.
But in that case, like, how did you, like, I think for all of us, like, it's really interesting to hear an artist talk about, like, grokking a new collection.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I knew about the collection well in advance, and I had kind of formed my opinion about what types of output that I really enjoyed.
Because you've been tracking it.
Yeah, and I knew Emily beforehand. So that gave me some insight into what I really liked. And that, yeah, so just using my eyes, basically. And also just like going all in. Like there are pieces that I have that are more interchangeable than others. I was definitely lucky to capture a few very unique pieces, and being kind of in the mindset that it doesn't matter if I spend a bit too much here, because it's all good. So I don't have that much of a guidance to how I approach it, and other pieces or other series where I'm collecting fewer pieces is more about taking my time to figure out what I really like about it. I'm not too concerned with whether things moon or not, or going up and down. So it's more like, can I do this? Do I like it? Yeah, I'll do it.
You mentioned Emily, you mentioned Tyler, you mentioned Matt. Like, who are some other artists that you admire, that you follow? Like
the recent couple of outputs from Inprecision, the Parnassus and whatever he's working on next is like, it is very much aligned with my ideas about generative art, and I'm kind of envious about what he's doing. Like, it's really fantastic. I'm also I'm also interested in like looking at people that are doing stuff way different than me. Like Lauren Bednar and his animation work is nothing like what I would ever do, but it's also really nice to get that fresh take on what other minds work like. I really enjoy Aaron Penn's work as well. It's also like, especially his animation work, Return is so fantastically meditative, and
you had a rituals experience today.
And the rituals experience, like that is amazing work as well.
I see you spend a fair amount of time in art in Block Talk.
Yeah. For better or worse.
Describe that community. What is it like? Because you're much, you are available and visible and very transparent as an artist in ways that a lot of artists aren't.
Yeah, I think, like, for me, that's kind of a continuation of how I approach my open source development on Twitter. Like, I was very open and part of the R Twitter community at that point. And for me, like, Blog Talk and Art Blogs is a community that I enjoy engaging with. It's definitely, like, it's more moody because it follows the ups and downs of crypto more. So there are very fantastic periods, often actually in where things are quiet, because then we can actually have conversations in there and so on. And then if things begins to take off, then we will also see opportunists jump in there and try to sell their vision. And that's, of course, also okay, but that kind of breaks up the conversation a bit. But there's a good community. There are regulars that all know they are regulars, and it's I enjoy the welcoming attitude within it. It feels like a nice place to hang out. Yeah.
Cool. Questions?
I wanted to know, with like kind of the references behind you, with like the avant-garde and constructivism and suprematism, there's like a political undertones and like spiritual undertones to those movements.
Yeah.
And of course the forms are pulled through, but I was wondering if there's like any of those tones that you kind of reference or is meaningful to you or that you impose in your work.
I wouldn't say there's any political, I haven't taken any political stuff with me from these movements. I think it's interesting to look at supremacism and constructivism because they're kind of contemporary. They're both rooted in socialist culture. But where constructivism was seen much more as a tool for for a political goal. Suprematism was actually like the far opposite of that. Like that they simply wanted to have art exist for its own sake without any connection to what was going on in the world. Even though it can feel Bauhausian in some sense, like Kandinsky is still deeply rooted in the organic forms. It's abstract, but it's still based on persons of organic forms, whereas supremacism is like it's purely geometrical. It should have no interpretation except for the geometry and what's there. And that part of supremacism I have definitely taken on. I don't think that's a political statement. It's just like an ideology about art that makes a lot of sense, especially in the context of Inprecision, where I really want to dive into composition just for the sake of composition. The placement of the different geometries and so on is there to support a composition, but nothing more. And also, one of the nice thing that really aligns in supremacism is also like when you take out all of that, all of the complexity of trying to do something that resembles something, you kind of force the person to meditate and ponder on the interaction between the ink and the paper and so on. And that's again something that's very dear to my heart right here. So no political taking in, but definitely some ideological alignment with some of it. Yeah.
So with screens, you kind of work towards making it so that there would be like far more outputs than were actually minted. And you talked about that, and also I think the generator you made was like just constantly producing new work, and it seemed like a big part of screens. And I'm wondering with this project, is it just going to solely focus on the 100 outputs, or is there also going to be like this kind of focus on what's beyond that as well? Because I don't know, I'm just wondering if you could like talk on that and how how that might maybe that might change in future as we continue to explore different ways of dealing with these kind of outputs, because they are kind of infinite, but we do limit them.
Yeah, I think for screens, as you say, like I'm comfortable like with multiple thousands of outputs existing, basically. What I have created is sort of this ephemeral generator where you like what you draw out a new unique output, but you will never know how to regenerate it. Like it exists only for as long as it's on screen. And I think like that kind of showing is it doesn't matter. Like Inprecision could work for that as well, because you would just not be surprised in the same way, but you would still like explore the different areas of the algorithm. But I don't think that at the same time there should be more than 100 existing. Like for screens, it's okay that there exist at the same time 1,000, and you can look at them side by side. Whereas for Inprecision, that would be too many. But if they are not existing at the same time, if you just like a constant feed of new things that you will never see again, then you don't get the same like tiredness of it. And I think that lends itself well to most output types. It's definitely something that's interesting to kind of follow how you're going to approach exhibitions and how to communicate generative art in general. Showing just a single or 2 or 3 pieces from an algorithm, at least those that are made for like long form generative art, is a disservice to the art form, because you're not really showing the infinite vastness of the space. And I think these kind of ephemeral running output is one way of kind of giving viewers the sense that this is not limited to 1 or 2 pieces like it is. It's actually infinite art in some sense. So I'm looking forward to exhibitions leaning more into like how can we educate viewers on that aspect.
The space is evolving and iterating so quickly and growing so rapidly in terms of new artists coming in and artists creating new bodies of work and new algorithms. Do you have a hope for what you think this like the legacy from this time period should be, kind of looking back, and also kind of touching on going forward, where would you like to see this space go?
There has been an explosion. There's no doubt about that. And one of the things that has happened is that a lot of us artists that have been doing it for a long time has been pushed by a lot of new entrants, and that's fantastic in some sense. Like we have been, we cannot be lazy. Not that we were necessarily lazy anymore, but like the bar has been raised in terms of what you need to do to create unique artwork, and that's a good thing. Like hopefully that will simply elevate the whole space. That people that have a lot of experience are actually now pushed towards thinking more deeply, more intentional about their art. On top of that, we also have a lot of these artists that have suddenly been able to become full-time artists, or at least focus in a larger extent on their art because they're well paid for it. So what I really hope comes out of this is a general interest in generative art, but also that a lot of the practitioners will level up in terms of how they think about it, how they approach creating new art, and the thought process that goes into it. Even if the interest wanes a bit after this, we've also already seen like a drawback after the craziness of last year. I hope that the legacy will be that it empowered artists to think more deeply about their work and evaluating what they want to do in this space. Not just create images, but like how do they want to push the space forward. And if it actually happens, then that legacy will be quite grand, because it will really shepherd in a new time in generative art, hopefully, giving much more intent, purpose, but also like creating literature around it, like giving context around generative art and such. So that's the hope, that's the dream. We have yet to see if that manifests.
Cool. Thank you, Thomas.